A feared Manhattan crime boss walks into divorce court expecting victory, a signature, a payout, silence. His mistress sits beside him like a trophy already claimed. Then the courtroom door opens. His wife, the one he buried in silence, the one who vanished without a trace, steps inside wearing thrift store clothes and carrying something that stops every breath in the room. A newborn baby. Cameras flash, marshals freeze. The most powerful man in New York's underworld watches his carefully constructed empire crack open in front of federal judges, rival families, and the woman he never thought would fight back. If you want to see how the invisible wife dismantles an empire built on control, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Mara's story travels. The Manhattan Federal Courthouse stood like a monument to justice on a cold February morning, its limestone columns catching the winter light while news vans lined the street below. Inside courtroom 9B, the air hummed with anticipation. Cameras positioned at careful angles, sketch artists poised with charcoal, reporters wedged shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. This wasn't just another divorce hearing. This was theater. This was blood sport dressed in legal procedure. Because when Adriano Vescari's marriage ended, the whole city watched. He arrived at 9:45, flanked by 3 attorneys in custom suits that cost more than most people's cars. Adriano Vescari didn't walk. He moved through space like gravity bent around him. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made seasoned federal judges straighten their spines. His charcoal suit was Italian, his watch Swiss, his expression carved from marble. Dark hair swept back, sharp jaw, eyes the color of gunmetal that had witnessed things most people only saw in nightmares. Behind him, close enough to claim ownership, walked Vivian Cross. She was everything a mistress was supposed to be. Tall, blonde, draped in a cream designer dress that whispered money with every movement. Her heels clicked against the polished floor like a countdown. Diamond earrings caught the fluorescent light. She smiled for the cameras, that practiced, enigmatic curve of lips that suggested secrets and satisfaction in equal measure. Adriano's lead attorney, Marcus Hale, no relation to the wife, purely coincidental, carried a leather briefcase thick with documents. The divorce settlement was already drafted, already signed on Adriano's end. All that remained was the formality. The wife's signature, the judge's stamp, the quiet burial of a marriage that had served its purpose and outlived its usefulness. "We expect this to be brief," Marcus murmured as they settled at the plaintiff's table. "She hasn't contested anything. Her attorney confirmed she'll sign." Adriano said nothing. He rarely wasted words on certainties. Across the aisle, the defendant's table sat empty. Vivian leaned close, her perfume expensive and cloying. "Where is she?" "Irrelevant," Adriano replied, his voice low and final. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Helena Reyes entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for cutting through nonsense like a scalpel through silk. She'd presided over mob trials, cartel cases, corruption scandals that toppled political dynasties. She settled into her bench with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen every variation of human weakness. "Case number 24 CV8831, the clerk announced. Vescari versus Hale, petition for dissolution of marriage. Marcus stood smoothly. "Your Honor," Marcus Hale representing the petitioner Adriano Vescari, "we're prepared to proceed with the uncontested settlement as filed." Judge Reyes glanced at the empty defendant's table. "And counsel for Mrs. Hale?" A door at the side of the courtroom opened. Every head turned. The woman who entered wasn't what anyone expected. She was small, maybe 5'4" in flat shoes that had seen better days. Her coat was second-hand wool, clean but worn at the cuffs. Dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except a thin silver chain at her throat. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder and moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned to navigate hostile rooms. But it was what she carried in her arms that detonated the carefully controlled atmosphere. A baby, newborn, wrapped in a blue blanket, sleeping against her chest in one of those fabric carriers that kept infants close. Tiny fists curled near a rosebud mouth. Impossible to miss. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Cameras flashed in rapid succession despite the bailiff's barked warning. Reporters lunged forward. Sketch artists drew furiously. The bailiff moved to intercept, but Judge Reyes raised one hand. Order, she said quietly. The word cut through the noise like a blade. Order in my courtroom. Adriano had gone absolutely still. For a man who'd built an empire on control, on reading rooms and predicting outcomes, on staying 3 moves ahead of enemies and allies alike, this was checkmate delivered by someone he'd written off as irrelevant. Vivian's hand tightened on the table edge, knuckles white. Marcus half rose from his seat. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Sit down, counselor. Judge Reyes's attention fixed on the woman approaching the defendant's table. State your name for the record. Mara Hale. Her voice was steady, clear, with a faint accent that suggested English wasn't her first language. I'm the respondent in this case. Behind her, the courtroom door opened again. A woman in her 50s entered, gray suit, leather briefcase, the no-nonsense bearing of a public defender who'd spent decades in trenches. She moved to stand beside Mara. Diane Foster, Your Honor, I'll be representing Mrs. Hale. Judge Reyes leaned back. This was filed as an uncontested divorce, Ms. Foster. It was filed that way, Your Honor. It is no longer uncontested. Marcus shot to his feet. Your Honor, Mrs. Hale has had 8 months to respond to these proceedings. She disappeared without a trace, refused all contact, ignored multiple attempts at service. Service was accepted, Diane interrupted calmly. I have the signed receipt. Mrs. Hale has been in contact with this court through proper channels under a protected address protocol due to credible safety concerns. Protected address. The words landed like artillery. Adriano's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. To anyone else, his expression remained unchanged, cold, remote, untouchable. But Vivian saw it. The muscle that jumped near his temple. The way his fingers curled into his palm. Your Honor, Marcus tried again, voice hardening. Mr. Viscari has been more than generous in his settlement offer. Mrs. Hale is entitled to a substantial financial package, property rights, ongoing support. I don't want his money. Mara's voice cut across the courtroom, quiet, but absolute. The gallery went silent. Judge Reyes studied her. You're refusing the settlement? I'm refusing to be bought. Mara shifted slightly, one hand supporting the baby's head with instinctive tenderness. I'm here to contest the terms of custody. Custody? Marcus's voice sharpened with disbelief. Your Honor, there are no children from this marriage listed in any filing, because I didn't know about him until after I'd already escaped. Escaped. Not left. Not departed. Escaped. Adriano stood slowly. The movement drew every eye. He was a man accustomed to silence when he moved, to people stepping back, to authority that needed no announcement. When he spoke, his voice carried that particular quiet that commanded more attention than shouting ever could. Is that my son? Mara turned to face him fully for the first time since entering the courtroom. The woman who'd once loved him, who'd believed his promises, who'd worn his ring like it meant something, met the eyes of the man who'd taught her that love was just another word for ownership. Yes, the single syllable detonated what remained of Adriano's composure. Not visibly. He was too controlled for that, too disciplined, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something fractured. How long have you known? I found out 2 weeks after your mother handed me divorce papers and threatened me in my own kitchen. Mara's voice remained steady, but steel threaded through it now. I was 8 weeks pregnant when I left. Vivian made a small sound, surprise or calculation, impossible to tell. Marcus recovered first. Your Honor, if there is indeed a child from this marriage, Mr. Viscari has every right to paternity testing and full custody consideration. He'll get both, Diane interjected. After we address why Mrs. Hale felt it necessary to hide a pregnancy and flee her own home. Judge Reyes removed her glasses, cleaning them with methodical precision. When she spoke, her tone carried decades of experience with powerful men and the wreckage they left behind. Was Foster, you're alleging abuse? I'm alleging coercive control, Your Honor. Financial imprisonment, surveillance, isolation. A pattern of behavior designed to eliminate my client's autonomy while maintaining plausible deniability. Marcus's expression turned sharp. These are serious accusations with no evidence. I have bank records showing Mrs. Hale had no access to independent funds, Diane said calmly. Security logs documenting her movements tracked 24/7. Testimony from building staff about the restrictions placed on her comings and goings. Phone records showing a single monitored device. And medical documentation from her pregnancy that will demonstrate she received no prenatal care while living in Mr. Viscari's residence, despite his substantial wealth, because she wasn't permitted independent medical appointments. The courtroom rippled with reaction. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras captured every moment. Adriano's voice cut through the noise like a blade. I would have given her anything she needed. Anything except freedom. Mara's response came immediately, without heat, just facts delivered with devastating simplicity. Anything except the ability to leave a room without guards following. Anything except access to my own money. Anything except the basic human right to exist without asking permission. I was protecting you. The words came out harder than Adriano intended, frustration bleeding through his legendary control. Do you have any idea how many people would use you to get to me? And yet the only person who ever made me feel like I was in danger was you. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Reyes let it stretch, watching both parties with the clinical assessment of someone reading x-rays for fractures. Finally, she spoke. We're going to take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I want medical records, financial documentation, and a preliminary paternity test protocol established. Miss Foster, your client will provide a full statement under oath. Mr. Hale, your client will do the same. She paused. And someone find out if there are any active protection orders I should know about. The gavel came down. Adriano moved before anyone else could react. He crossed the courtroom in 4 strides, closing the distance to the defendant's table before his attorneys could intervene. 2 U.S. Marshals shifted position, hands moving toward weapons, but Judge Reyes raised one finger. Wait. Adriano stopped 3 feet from Mara, close enough to see the exhaustion shadowing her eyes, close enough to notice she'd lost weight, close enough to hear the small sound the baby made as he stirred against her chest. Let me see him. Not a demand. Almost a request. Mara's hand tightened protectively over the carrier. No. He's my son. He's my son, Mara corrected quietly. You lost the right to him when you taught me that safety meant disappearing. Adriano's hands clenched at his sides. I never touched you. I never raised a hand. You didn't have to. Her voice dropped lower, meant only for him. You controlled every breath I took. You made me a prisoner in a gilded cage and called it love. You brought another woman into our home and made me watch my own erasure. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of every moment she'd survived alone. The day I realized I was pregnant, I knew exactly what would happen. You'd take him, you'd turn him into another asset to control, and I'd become nothing more than the vessel that delivered your heir. That's not... Adriano stopped, because the denial caught in his throat, because somewhere deep in the architecture of his mind, he recognized the truth. He would have controlled it all. The pregnancy. The birth. The child. Not out of malice. He would have told himself it was protection, provision, responsibility, but control nonetheless. Mara saw the recognition flicker across his face. I didn't run from you because I thought you'd hurt me, Adriano. I ran because I knew you'd love me the only way you know how, by owning me completely. The baby whimpered, a small sound of discomfort. Mara automatically adjusted the carrier, swaying slightly in that universal rhythm of mothers soothing children. The gesture was so natural, so practiced, it told a story of months lived without him. Midnight feedings, crying jags, first smiles. All the moments he'd missed. Not because he didn't want them, because she'd chosen survival over his version of safety. His name, Adriano said roughly. What did you name him? Mara hesitated. Then Enzo. Enzo Viscari. His grandfather's name. The man who'd built the empire Adriano inherited, who'd ruled with iron will and unexpected moments of tenderness. The man who'd taught Adriano that power required sacrifice, that weakness invited destruction, that love was a liability unless carefully controlled. Adriano closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, Vivian stood at his elbow. We should go, she said quietly, hand sliding to his arm with casual possession. Let the attorneys handle this. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since Mara walked into the courtroom. Vivian Cross, who'd been his escape, his rebellion against the suffocating expectations of a marriage arranged more for alliance than affection. Vivian, who understood his world, who never demanded emotional availability, who took what he offered and asked for nothing deeper. Vivian, who would never in 1,000 years carry his child into a federal courtroom and fight the entire weight of his empire for the right to raise that child free. "Give us a minute," he said. Vivian's smile tightened. "Adriano, now." She left, heels clicking sharp disapproval across marble floors. Mara watched her go. "She's everything you wanted. Beautiful. Uncomplicated. Happy to live in the spaces you allow." "She's not the mother of my son." "No," Mara agreed. "She's the woman you chose the moment you decided I wasn't worth fighting for." The accusation hit harder than any of Diane Foster's legal arguments. Because it was true. He'd stopped seeing Mara months before Vivian appeared, had stopped trying, had relegated his wife to furniture, pleasant, unobtrusive, easily ignored, until she proved impossible to ignore. "What do you want?" Adriano asked, and the question cost him more than he expected. "Money? Property? Full custody? Name it." "I want you to leave us alone." Mara's voice remained steady. "I want you to sign away your rights and let us disappear. I want my son to grow up knowing his father chose power over him." "That's not going to happen." The words came out flat, absolute. "He's my blood, my responsibility, my possession," Mara finished. "Asset? Future soldier in whatever war you're fighting this week." "My son," Adriano said, and the raw edge in his voice silenced her. "I've done terrible things, Mara. I've hurt people. I've made choices that keep me awake at night, but I've never walked away from my responsibilities." "Then prove it." She met his eyes without flinching. "Prove you can be a father instead of a jailer. Prove you can love without controlling. Prove you're capable of putting someone else's needs ahead of your empire." She paused. "Until then, you get supervised visits, court-ordered, documented, limited. You can't watch me." The bailiff called them back to order. Judge Reyes resumed her position, folders now thick with documentation that had arrived during recess. She reviewed the material with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that details mattered, that cases like this required more than surface judgments. Finally, she looked up. "I've reviewed the preliminary statements and supporting documentation. Ms. Foster, your client's protected address status is verified and will remain in effect. Mr. Hale, your client will submit to paternity testing within 48 hours. She paused. "However, given the serious allegations of coercive control and the documented pattern of restricted autonomy, I'm issuing a temporary custody order." Marcus stood immediately. "Your Honor." "Sit down, counselor." Judge Reyes's tone brooked no argument. "Mrs. Hale is granted temporary primary custody. Mr. Viscari will be permitted supervised visitation twice weekly, 2 hours per session, at a neutral location to be determined by Child Services. These visits will be contingent on Mr. Viscari completing a parenting assessment and participating in family counseling." The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Marcus protested loudly about bias and procedure. Adriano heard none of it. He stood frozen, watching the most powerful verdict of his life delivered by a woman in judicial robes who'd just done what no crime family, no rival syndicate, no federal prosecutor had ever managed. She'd ruled against him. Not because of his crimes, those were carefully buried, expertly hidden, but because of how he'd loved, how he'd failed, how he'd confused protection with possession until the woman he'd married chose exile over his version of safety. Judge Reyes continued over the chaos. "This court recognizes that Mr. Viscari has rights as a biological father, but those rights must be balanced against the child's best interests and the documented pattern of controlling behavior toward the mother. Until Mr. Viscari demonstrates the ability to maintain appropriate boundaries and respect Mrs. Hale's autonomy, supervised visitation is the only responsible course." "Your Honor, this is—" Marcus tried again. "Final." Judge Reyes brought her gavel down with decisive force. "We'll reconvene in 6 weeks to review progress. Court is adjourned." The gavel's echo seemed to reverberate through Adriano's chest. Mara gathered her bag, checked the baby's carrier, and turned to leave. Diane Foster moved beside her like a shield, Marshals cleared a path through the pressing crowd. She didn't look back. Adriano watched her walk away. This woman he'd married, controlled, underestimated, and lost, carrying his son toward a future he had no power to dictate. For a man who'd spent his entire adult life mastering circumstances, bending situations to his will, eliminating obstacles through strategy or force, the helplessness was suffocating. Vivian reappeared at his side. That was a disaster. Get out. The words came out quiet, cold, final. She blinked. What? Leave, now. Don't come back. Adriano, you can't be serious. He turned to face her fully, and whatever she saw in his expression made her step back. You were a mistake. A distraction. A way to pretend I hadn't already destroyed the one thing that mattered. But I see it now. His voice dropped lower. You were never the answer. You were just another form of running away. Vivian's perfect composure cracked. After everything Everything you what? Adriano interrupted. Sat beside me? Smiled for cameras? Played the part I needed played? He shook his head. You gave me nothing real, Vivian, and I gave you even less. We're done. She left without another word, dignity shredded but pride intact enough to walk away with her head high. Marcus approached cautiously. We need to file an immediate appeal. The custody ruling is overly restrictive, possibly biased. No. Adriano's voice was flat. No? Marcus stared at him. Adriano, she just got primary custody of your son based on allegations you can easily disprove. Can I? Adriano turned to face his attorney. Can I disprove that I monitored her movements, controlled her access to money, made decisions about her life without consulting her? He paused. Can I honestly say I would have let her keep that pregnancy private? That I wouldn't have immediately arranged everything, doctors, security, her entire existence, without asking what she wanted? Marcus said nothing, because they both knew the answer. Set up the visitation, Adriano said quietly. Whatever they require. Parenting classes, counseling, assessments, schedule it all. And find out everything about where she's been, what she needed, how she survived. His jaw tightened. I want to know every moment I missed. Adriano, my son was born, and I wasn't there. He's been alive for weeks, and I didn't even know he existed. Because the woman I married was so terrified of my version of protection that she chose to face pregnancy and childbirth alone rather than trust me. The words came out harder than intended. So, we're not fighting the custody order, Marcus. We're earning our way back. Outside the courthouse, a sleek black car waited. Adriano slid into the back seat, ignoring the cameras, the reporters shouting questions, the circus his life had become in the span of 90 minutes. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother, Celeste Vescari. We need to talk, now. He deleted it. Another message. This one from his second-in-command. The Marinos are asking questions. The public custody battle makes us look weak. He deleted that too. A third message appeared. This one from an unknown number. Congratulations on fatherhood. Didn't realize you had it in you to lose control. The enemies circling, sensing blood in the water, a crack in the armor of the feared Viscari Empire. Let them circle. Adriano leaned back against expensive leather, closed his eyes, and saw only one image. Mara walking away with his son, choosing the unknown over everything he could provide. Because provision had never been the problem. Control was the problem. Ownership was the problem. His absolute certainty that love meant the elimination of risk, even if it also eliminated freedom, that was the problem. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Adriano Vescari had no idea how to fix what he'd broken. The car pulled away from the courthouse, leaving behind the reporters and the chaos and the public humiliation. But there was no escaping the truth that had detonated in that courtroom. He'd lost. Not to a rival family or a federal investigation or a business betrayal. He'd lost to the quiet courage of a woman he'd tried to make invisible, who'd fought back by becoming impossible to ignore. And his son, Enzo, named for the grandfather who'd taught Adriano everything except how to love without destroying, was growing up beyond his reach, protected by the very rules he'd spent a lifetime learning to break. The Empire would survive this. Adriano wasn't sure he would. His phone buzzed again. This time, a single message from Diane Foster. First supervised visit scheduled for Thursday, 2 p.m. Department of Children's Services, Brooklyn office. Be on time. Be appropriate. Be prepared to prove you can be what your son needs. Adriano stared at the message until the screen went dark. Thursday, 2 days away. 2 days to figure out how to be a father to a child who didn't know him, supervised by social workers who'd read every damning detail of his marriage, watched by a woman who'd once loved him and now only wanted him gone. 2 days to become someone he'd never learned to be. The car merged into Manhattan traffic, carrying him back toward a penthouse that suddenly felt less like a fortress and more like a monument to everything he'd gotten wrong. Somewhere across the city, in a location he didn't know and couldn't track, Mara held their son and breathed freely for the first time in 2 years. And Adriano Vescari, feared crime boss, untouchable empire builder, man who'd never lost a battle that mattered, sat alone in the back of a car and learned what defeat actually felt like. It felt like watching your future walk away. It felt like knowing you'd destroyed the one thing you couldn't buy, threaten, or control back into existence. It felt like realizing that all the power in the world meant nothing if you couldn't protect the people you loved from yourself. The city lights blurred past the window. Thursday couldn't come fast enough, and Adriano had absolutely no idea what he was going to do when it arrived. The Brooklyn Department of Children's Services office occupied the 3rd floor of a gray municipal building that had seen better decades. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Linoleum floors bore the scuff marks of countless family crises. The waiting area smelled like burnt coffee and institutional disinfectant, decorated with faded posters about child safety and parenting resources that had been laminated sometime in the previous century. Adriano arrived at 1:55, 5 minutes early, alone. No attorneys, no security detail waiting in the lobby, no tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He wore dark jeans, a simple black sweater, and leather boots that were expensive but understated. His hair was still damp from a shower, pushed back from his face. He hadn't shaved, the shadow along his jaw making him look younger, less polished, almost vulnerable. He looked, for the first time in years, like a man who wasn't entirely certain of his next move. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, glanced up from her computer. Name? Adriano Vescari. I have a 2 o'clock supervised visitation. She consulted her screen, typed something, then gestured toward the waiting area. Have a seat. Ms. Chen will be with you shortly. He sat in a plastic chair that was bolted to the floor, surrounded by other people waiting for their own appointments. A young mother with a toddler on her hip. An older couple speaking quietly in Spanish. A teenage girl texting furiously, knee bouncing with nervous energy. No one recognized him. No one stared. In this place, he was just another name on a caseworker's schedule, another father trying to navigate the system's requirements. It was the most anonymous he'd felt in a decade. At exactly 2 o'clock, a door opened and a woman in her 40s emerged, carrying a tablet and wearing a lanyard that identified her as Susan Chen, LCSW. She had short gray hair, practical clothing, and the expression of someone who'd heard every excuse and seen every failure pattern human beings could produce. Mr. Vescari? He stood. Yes. Come with me, please. She led him down a corridor lined with closed doors, each marked with numbers and vague departmental designations. They stopped at room 304. Susan opened the door and gestured him inside. The visitation room was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet. A table with chairs. A basket of toys in the corner. Blocks, stuffed animals, picture books. A camera mounted in the upper corner, red light blinking to indicate active recording. One window looked out over the parking lot. Bars on the glass, not to keep people in, but to protect against break-ins. Mara sat in the far chair, Enzo in her arms. She wore a blue sweater, jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked tired but determined, that same quiet steel he'd seen in the courtroom. The baby was awake, tiny fists waving, eyes unfocused in that newborn way that suggested he was still figuring out the whole being alive situation. Adriano stopped in the doorway, struck motionless by the sight of them. His son, his wife, ex-wife technically, though the divorce still wasn't finalized. The family he'd destroyed before it ever really began. Susan cleared her throat. Mr. Vescari, please come in and have a seat. Mrs. Hale, Thank you for being on time. Mara nodded but said nothing. Adriano moved to the opposite side of the table and sat down, keeping distance, respecting the invisible boundaries that had been drawn. Susan settled into a chair positioned between them, tablet ready. All right, this is your first supervised visitation. I'll be present for the entire session, and everything is being recorded for documentation purposes. The goal here is to begin building a relationship between father and child in a safe, monitored environment. She looked at Adriano. Have you completed the Parenting Basics orientation? Yes, last night. Online module and assessment. Good. And you're scheduled for your first counseling session next Tuesday? 2 o'clock. Dr. Patricia Winters. Susan made notes. Mrs. Pele, do you have any concerns before we begin? Mara's arms tightened slightly around Enzo. Just 8. He'll probably sleep through most of this. That's fine. Mr. Viscari, do you have any questions about how this works? Adriano's gaze remained fixed on the baby. Can I hold him? Susan glanced at Mara. That's up to Mrs. Hale. This is about establishing comfort and safety first. Not yet. Mara's voice was quiet but absolute. Let him get used to you first. It stung more than Adriano expected, but he nodded. All right. Susan sat back slightly. Why don't you start by talking to him? Babies respond to voices, even at this age. Adriano had negotiated with cartel leaders, stared down federal prosecutors, delivered orders that sent men to their deaths. He'd faced situations that required split-second decisions with million-dollar consequences. But this, talking to a sleeping infant who had no idea who he was, felt impossible. I don't know what to say. Start simple, Susan suggested. Introduce yourself. He looked at Enzo, really looked at him. The baby had dark hair, wispy and soft. His face was round, still holding that newborn pudginess. Tiny fingers curled against Mara's sweater. Even asleep, he made small movements, a stretch, a yawn, random reflexes that seemed both miraculous and ordinary. Hello, Enzo. The words came out rougher than intended. I'm your father. The baby didn't react, lost in whatever dreams newborns had. I wasn't there when you were born, Adriano continued, voice low. I should have been. I would have been, if I'd known. But I didn't, because I made your mother feel like she had to run from me to keep you safe. He paused. That's on me, not her. Me. Mara's expression shifted slightly, surprise flickering across her features before she controlled it. Susan wrote something on her tablet. Go on. I don't know how to be a father, Adriano admitted. My own father died when I was 6. My grandfather raised me, and he was complicated. He taught me about power, about control, about never showing weakness. He taught me that love was dangerous unless you managed it carefully. He looked at Mara briefly, then back to Enzo. I thought that's what I was doing with your mother, managing the danger, keeping her safe, but I was just repeating the same mistakes. Mr. Viscari, Susan interjected gently. This session is about you and Enzo. Let's keep the focus there. He nodded. Right. Back to the baby. You're 3 weeks old. I missed your birth, your first breath, the first time your mother held you, all the late nights, the crying, the moments when you're figuring out how this whole world works. His hands rested flat on the table, careful not to reach out, respecting boundaries. But I'm here now, and I'm going to keep showing up, even if it's only 2 hours twice a week in a room with cameras and a social worker taking notes. Even if your mother doesn't trust me, even if you grow up never really knowing me, I'm going to show up. Enzo stirred slightly, making a small sound. Not quite crying, just a vocal complaint about whatever discomfort newborns experienced. Mara adjusted him automatically, that practice movement of a mother who'd learned her baby's cues. She started to stand, reaching for the diaper bag. Let me, Adriano said. She froze. What? Let me change him. If he needs changing, I took the orientation. I know the basics. Susan looked interested. Mrs. Hale? Mara hesitated, every protective instinct clearly warring with the knowledge that Enzo needed a father, not an ATM with visiting privileges. Finally, she nodded. There's a changing pad in the bag. Adriano moved carefully, extracting the pad and supplies. He spread it on the table, then turned to Mara. May I? She stood, carried Enzo to the table, and laid him down on the pad. The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but alert. He made another small sound of complaint. "Support his head," Mara instructed, voice tense. "Always support his head." "I know." Adriano's hands were surprisingly gentle as he worked, unsnapping the onesie, opening the diaper. His movements were awkward, unpracticed, but careful. He cleaned, applied ointment from the tube Mara silently handed him, secured a fresh diaper with the kind of concentration usually reserved for diffusing bombs. Enzo kicked his legs, tiny movements of protest. "I know," Adriano murmured. "Cold air. Indignity of being changed by a stranger. I get it." He finished snapping the onesie back together, then carefully lifted the baby, supporting his head, cradling him against his chest. For a moment, everything stopped. Father and son, connected by biology and a legal system that was trying to build what should have existed from the beginning. Enzo settled against him, seemingly content, or at least not actively unhappy. His small body fit perfectly in the crook of Adriano's arm. His breathing was soft, regular, trusting in the way infants trusted because they didn't yet know about danger or betrayal, or men who confused love with control. Adriano looked down at him, and something fundamental shifted in his chest. Not the abstract concept of fatherhood he'd imagined during sleepless nights after the courtroom disaster. Not the theoretical responsibility he'd acknowledged, but the visceral, undeniable reality that this small person existed because of him, depended on the world being safer than it was, deserved better than the legacy Adriano had been building. "He looks like you," Mara said quietly. Adriano glanced up. "You think so?" "The nose, the chin." She paused. "He has your mother's eyes, though, that particular shade of dark brown." The mention of Celeste landed like a grenade. Adriano's jaw tightened. "She doesn't get to meet him." "That's not your decision to make." "The hell it isn't. She threatened you. She pushed divorce papers and tried to buy your silence. She's part of why you ran." Susan intervened smoothly. "Let's table that discussion for now. Mr. Viscari, how does it feel to hold him?" He looked down at Enzo again, this tiny weight in his arms. "Terrifying." "Why terrifying?" "Because I could destroy him." The words came out stark, honest. "Not intentionally, but I could raise him the way I was raised. Teach him that power matters more than people, that control equals safety, that showing vulnerability invites destruction." He paused. "I could turn him into me." "And what's wrong with that?" Susan asked, voice neutral. "Everything." Adriano met her eyes. "I'm sitting in a supervised visitation room because the woman I married was so afraid of my version of love that she chose to face pregnancy alone rather than tell me about my own son. Everything about how I approach relationships is wrong." Susan made more notes. "That's significant self-awareness, Mr. Viscari." "It doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," Mara said suddenly. Both of them looked at her. She was gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white. "For 2 years, you never once admitted you might be wrong. You justified everything, the monitoring, the restrictions, the way you made decisions about my life without asking me. You called it protection and acted like I was ungrateful for questioning it." "I was wrong." Adriano's voice was quiet. "About all of it. Saying it in a supervised visit with a social worker taking notes isn't the same as meaning it." "I know." He looked down at Enzo. "That's why I'm here, why I'm not fighting the custody order, why I'm taking the parenting classes and scheduling counseling sessions and showing up to prove I can be different." He paused. "I don't expect you to believe me. I don't expect trust. I just need you to give me enough room to prove it's not just words." The baby made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a yawn. Adriano automatically adjusted his hold, supporting Enzo's head the way Mara had taught him, minutes ago. Susan watched the interaction with clinical interest. "Mrs. Hale, what would you need to see from Mr. Viscari to feel comfortable with unsupervised visits?" Mara didn't answer immediately. She stared at Adriano holding their son, this man who'd once been everything she wanted, successful, protective, attentive, before she understood that protection without freedom was just another word for prison. "Consistency," she finally said. "Show up to every visit, complete the counseling. Prove this isn't just about ego or control or winning some game." She paused. And respect my boundaries. No trying to find out where I live, no investigators, no money showing up mysteriously, no having people follow me. I need to know you can give me space. Done. Adriano didn't hesitate. Just like that? Just like that. He met her eyes over Enzo's sleeping form. I spent 2 years controlling your every movement because I thought that's what keeping you safe looked like. I was wrong. You're safer away from me than you ever were in my penthouse. If space is what you need, you have it. Susan glanced at the clock. We have 45 minutes left, mister. Viscari, would you like to feed him? He just ate, Mara protested. Babies eat frequently, Susan said mildly, and it's good bonding practice. Mara looked torn. Finally, she reached into the diaper bag and pulled out a bottle she'd prepared. It's breast milk, room temperature. He'll eat about 2 ounces. Adriano took the bottle, settled more comfortably in his chair, and carefully positioned Enzo in his arms. The baby's mouth opened automatically when the nipple touched his lips, latching on with surprising strength for something so small. Support the bottom of the bottle, Mara instructed, hovering. Don't let him suck air. I've got it. She sat back down reluctantly, watching every movement like she was waiting for disaster. But Adriano was careful, attentive, following the cues he'd learned in the orientation video. When Enzo needed burping, he lifted him to his shoulder, supported his head, patted gently until a small burp emerged. When the baby fussed, he adjusted position. When Enzo's eyes drooped closed again, satisfied and sleepy, Adriano just held him, this impossibly small person who represented everything he'd never learned to do right. The room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional scratch of Susan's stylus on her tablet. Mara broke the quiet first. Where's Vivian? Adriano didn't look up from Enzo. Gone. Gone where? Gone, period. I ended it. Day of the custody hearing. Mara's expression was unreadable. Because of the optics? Because she was never real. He finally met her eyes. You asked me once why I married you. You remember what I said? You said I was different, interesting, that you wanted to know me. I meant it. His voice dropped lower. You were the first person in years who looked at me and didn't see the empire or the money or the power. You saw me. And instead of appreciating that, instead of protecting it, I tried to own it. I took something genuine and turned it into another asset to manage. And Vivian? Vivian was everything you weren't. Uncomplicated, undemanding, happy to exist in the spaces I allowed without asking for more. He paused. She was easier, and I was a coward. Susan cleared her throat. Mr. Viscari, I appreciate your honesty, but again, this session is about your relationship with Enzo. Let's keep the focus there. It's all connected, Adriano said. Enzo exists because I married his mother. He's in this situation because I failed his mother. How I treat her, how I acknowledge what I did wrong, that matters to who I am as his father. Fair point. Susan made more notes. Mara studied him, this man she'd loved and feared and finally fled. What happened to you after I left? He considered the question. I looked for you. Hired investigators, called in favors, checked hospitals and border crossings. For 3 months, I searched. He shifted Enzo slightly, careful not to wake him. Then I stopped. Why? Because my mother pointed out that you'd obviously gone to extreme lengths to disappear. And if I found you, if I dragged you back, I'd just be proving you were right to run. He smiled without humor. She meant it as strategy, like, let the ungrateful wife go, move on, marry someone more suitable. But I heard it differently. How did you hear it? That I'd become exactly what I swore I'd never be. His voice went quiet. My grandfather used to say that power without control was chaos. So he controlled everything, his business, his family, his wife. My grandmother lived like a ghost in her own home. Beautiful prison, expensive cage, no autonomy. She died when I was 12, and I remember thinking she looked relieved. He paused. I swore I'd never do that. And then I did exactly that to you. Mara looked away, blinking rapidly. Susan watched them both with the clinical detachment of someone trained to observe family dynamics. Mrs. Hale, do you want to respond to that? I don't know what to say. Mara's voice was thick. For 2 years, I waited for him to see it. to understand why I was suffocating. I tried to tell him, tried to explain, but he always had reasons, good reasons, legitimate dangers, real threats. She looked at Adriano. And now you're saying you understand, but you only understand because I took the most extreme action possible, because I literally had to run away and hide a pregnancy to make you see. Yes, Adriano didn't flinch from the accusation. That's exactly what I'm saying. So what happens when things get hard again? Mara demanded. When Enzo starts school and there are actual safety concerns? When he's a teenager making bad choices? When life presents real dangers that require real protection? Do you default back to control? Do you justify it because this time the threat is legitimate? I don't know. The honesty seemed to cost him. I don't have a good answer for that. All I can tell you is I'm trying to learn a different way. Trying isn't enough. It's all I have right now. Enzo stirred in his arms, making a small sound of discomfort. Adriano automatically started that swaying motion he'd seen Mara do, instinctive despite his inexperience. You're good with him, Mara said quietly. He's asleep. Hard to mess up holding a sleeping baby. You'd be surprised. She almost smiled. The first week after he was born, I was terrified constantly. Every sound he made, every time he cried, I was convinced I was doing something wrong. You were alone. The words came out harder than Adriano intended. You went through labor alone, brought him home alone, figured out feeding and sleeping and all of it without help. I had help. The shelter connected me with resources. There were nurses, support groups, other mothers. Strangers. Adriano's jaw tightened. You relied on strangers because I made you afraid to rely on me. Susan intervened before Mara could respond. Mr. Vescari, I'm hearing a lot of guilt. That's understandable and probably healthy to a degree, but guilt alone doesn't change behavior. What specific actions are you taking to become a different kind of father than the model you inherited? Adriano was quiet for a moment, looking down at Enzo. I'm reading everything I can find about child development. I'm taking the parenting classes seriously, not just checking boxes. I'm in therapy, not the court-ordered counseling, separate sessions with a therapist who specializes in intergenerational trauma. He paused. And I'm making changes to my business. Mara's head snapped up. What kind of changes? The kind that means Enzo doesn't inherit an empire built on things I can't explain to him when he's old enough to ask questions. You're leaving the family business? She sounded genuinely shocked. I'm transforming it, legitimizing what can be legitimized, divesting from what can't. It's going to take years, and it's going to make me enemies. But I don't want my son growing up the way I did. His voice went quiet. I don't want him learning that power is the only thing that matters, that people are assets to manage, that love is dangerous unless you control it completely. Susan was typing rapidly now, documenting everything. Mara stared at him, trying to reconcile this man, holding their son, admitting failures, talking about therapy and business transformation, with the one who'd monitored her movements and made her feel like a prisoner in designer clothes. I don't know if I believe you, she finally said. I know. Adriano met her eyes. But I'm going to keep showing up anyway. Keep doing the work. Keep proving it's not just words. He paused. Not for the custody arrangement, not to win you back, but because he deserves a father who's better than what I've been. The session wound down with Susan providing instructions for the next visit, documenting Adriano's successful completion of basic care tasks, and reviewing the schedule for his ongoing requirements. When the 2 hours ended, Mara carefully took Enzo back, settling him into his carrier with practiced efficiency. Adriano stood, feeling the absence immediately. His arms felt empty. The room felt emptier. Same time next week? Susan confirmed. I'll be here. Adriano looked at Mara. Thank you for letting me have this. She nodded but didn't answer, already focused on gathering her things, creating distance. He left the building and found his driver waiting in the parking lot, the one concession to his former life he'd allowed himself. The man opened the door without comment, used to Adriano's shifting moods and new boundaries. But instead of getting in, Adriano pulled out his phone and made a call. His mother answered on the second ring. It's about time. We need to discuss the situation before it gets worse. I met him today, Enzo. Silence. Then, carefully. And? And he's perfect, completely perfect, and you're never going to meet him. Adriano, you threatened his mother. You tried to buy her silence. You're part of the reason she ran. His voice was steel. So you don't get access. Not to him, not to her, not to any information about where they are or how they're doing. You can't be serious. Celeste's voice sharpened. He's my grandson, my blood. You can't keep family from family. Watch me. He disconnected, blocked the number, and got into the car. The driver pulled into traffic. Where to, sir? The office. Then, after a pause, actually, no. Take me to Dr. Winters' practice. Your appointment isn't until Tuesday. I know, but I need to see if she has an opening now. The driver said nothing, just changed course. Adriano leaned back, closing his eyes, seeing only Enzo's small face, feeling the phantom weight of his son in his arms, the vulnerability of it, the terrifying knowledge that this tiny person's entire future depended on whether Adriano could actually change, or whether he'd just repeat the same cycles that had destroyed his grandmother, damaged his mother, and driven Mara into hiding. His phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. The Marinos made a move on the construction contracts. We need to respond. He deleted it. Another text, this one from his second. Meeting tonight. Territory disputes need resolution. He deleted that too. A third message appeared, this one from Diane Foster. Mrs. Hale reports the visit went well. You showed appropriate boundaries and genuine engagement. Keep it up. He stared at that message for a long time. Appropriate boundaries. Genuine engagement. 5 weeks ago, those words would have meant nothing to him. Now they felt like the only measurement that mattered. The car pulled up to a brownstone in the West Village. Dr. Patricia Winters' practice occupied the ground floor, discreet brass plaque beside a blue door. Adriano went inside, approached the reception desk. I don't have an appointment, but I was hoping Dr. Winters might have an opening. It's urgent. The receptionist consulted her screen. She's with a client until 4, but if you want to wait, I'll wait. He sat in the small waiting area, surrounded by carefully neutral artwork and magazines about mindfulness and mental health. The other people waiting glanced at him curiously. This man in expensive casual clothes, radiating tension, looking like he'd walked straight off a crime thriller set. At 4:15, Dr. Winters emerged, a black woman in her 50s with gray locks and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. She saw him waiting and raised an eyebrow. Mr. Vescari, you're early for Tuesday. I need to talk. The words came out rougher than intended. Now. If you have time. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Come on back. Her office was warm, filled with books and plants and comfortable furniture that invited confession. She settled into her chair, gestured for him to take the couch. What happened? I held my son today. First time. Adriano's hands clenched on his knees. And all I could think was how easy it would be to destroy him, not on purpose, just by being who I am, by teaching him what I was taught, by loving him the way I was loved. And how were you loved? Dr. Winters asked quietly. Conditionally. Strategically. My grandfather loved me if I was strong, smart, useful. If I showed weakness, he called it disappointing. If I questioned him, he called it disrespect. He paused. My mother loved me if I made the family proud, if I expanded the empire, if I married the right woman and produced the right heirs. Did anyone love you unconditionally? Adriano was quiet for a long time. Mara tried to, before I convinced her I wasn't worth it. And now? Now I have a son who doesn't know me, who's only going to know me through supervised visits and court-ordered requirements and whatever his mother tells him about who I am. His voice cracked slightly. And I deserve that. But he doesn't. Dr. Winters leaned forward. What do you want for him? I want him to grow up knowing he's loved without conditions, that he doesn't have to earn it or perform for it or be someone he's not to deserve it. The words came faster now, desperate. I want him to feel safe being vulnerable, to know that asking for help isn't weakness, to understand that love doesn't mean control. Those are beautiful goals, Adriano. Can you give him those things? I don't know how. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. I don't have a model for it. I don't know what it looks like in practice. All I know is what not to do, and that's not enough. It's a start. Dr. Winters picked up a notepad. Let's talk about building a new model. Not the one your grandfather gave you, not the one your mother reinforced, but something you create intentionally for Enzo. They talked for 90 minutes about attachment styles and intergenerational trauma, about the difference between protection and control, about showing up consistently, respecting boundaries, earning trust through actions instead of demanding it through authority. When Adriano finally left, evening had settled over the city. He walked instead of calling the car, needing the movement, the cold air, the anonymous flow of people who had no idea who he was or what he'd done. His phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number. He almost ignored it, then recognized the area code, the city where Mara had disappeared to, where she'd given birth alone. He answered. Yes? Mr. Viscari? A woman's voice, professional. This is Rachel Martinez from Hope Haven Women's Shelter. Your wife listed you as someone to contact in case of emergency. His blood went cold. What happened? Is she okay? Is the baby... They're fine, but there's been an incident. Someone's been asking questions. A man claiming to be a family friend, wanting to know if we'd helped a woman matching Mara's description. Adriano's jaw clenched. What did you tell him? Nothing. We never confirm or deny resident information. But I wanted you to know in case... Did he leave a name? No. But he drove a black Escalade with New York plates. And he had an accent. Eastern European, maybe. Adriano's mind was already cataloging possibilities. Rival families. Business enemies. Someone from his mother's network trying to gather leverage. Thank you for calling. I'll handle it. Mr. Viscari, we don't give out protected addresses for a reason. If someone from your world is trying to find them, I know. His voice went hard. And I'm going to make sure they stop looking. He hung up, made another call. His head of security answered immediately. I need you to find out who's asking questions about Mara Hale in South Carolina. Escalade, New York plates, Eastern European. And I need them stopped, permanently if necessary. A pause. Boss, you said we weren't supposed to track her anymore. We're not. But if someone else is, they're about to learn why that's a bad idea. He made 3 more calls. By the time he reached his building, arrangements were in motion. Security for the shelter, discreet protection for Mara that she'd never know about, and a very clear message sent to anyone who thought his estranged wife and infant son were vulnerable targets. The penthouse felt cavernous when he entered. Too much space. Too much silence. Too many reminders of the life he'd built that had turned out to be empty. Vivian's things were already gone. She'd collected them while he was at the visitation, efficient even in endings. The bedroom they'd shared looked sterile now, impersonal. He stood in the doorway and felt nothing except relief that she was gone. He walked to what had been Mara's room. He'd kept it locked after she left, unwilling to erase the evidence of her existence, even as he'd tried to convince himself he was better off. Now he opened the door, stepped inside. Her books were still on the shelves, poetry in 3 languages, philosophy, history, a scarf draped over a chair. Photos tucked into the mirror frame. Her parents, friends from before she'd met him, a life she'd had that he'd systematically erased through isolation, disguised as protection. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone, scrolling to the photos from the orientation class. The instructor had demonstrated various holds and care techniques using a doll. Adriano had taken notes like he was studying for a doctoral exam. Now he pulled up videos about infant development, sleep training, feeding schedules. He watched them until his eyes burned, taking notes, trying to compress years of learning into weeks of preparation. His phone rang. Marcus. The Marinos made another move. You need to handle it. Adriano cut him off. Whatever it is, you handle it. Adriano, they're testing you. The custody situation made us look weak. If you don't respond, then I look weak. I don't care. He paused. I have exactly one priority right now, Marcus, and it's not maintaining appearances for families who'd sell their own children for the right price. This is about the baby. This is about becoming someone my son doesn't have to fear. He hung up, turned off the phone, and sat in the silence of Mara's abandoned room, surrounded by evidence of the woman he'd loved badly and the life he'd destroyed through control disguised as care. Tomorrow, there would be business to handle, enemies to manage, an empire that demanded attention. But tonight, Adriano Viscari sat alone in the dark and learned what it felt like to want something he couldn't buy, threaten, or negotiate his way into having. He wanted to be a good father, and for the first time in his life, he had absolutely no idea if he was capable of it. But he was going to show up and try anyway, because that sleeping baby in a supervised visitation room deserved at least that much. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both fragile and essential. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, 2 o'clock sharp, Adriano showed up at the Department of Children's Services. He was never late, never missed a session, never arrived with attorneys or bodyguards or any of the trappings of the empire he was systematically dismantling. He came alone, carrying things he'd learned mattered. A soft blanket Enzo seemed to prefer. Books about baby development that Susan had recommended. Once a stuffed elephant he'd seen in a shop window and couldn't resist, even though Enzo was too young to care. Mara noticed everything. The way he held their son with increasing confidence, the questions he asked about feeding schedules and sleep patterns, the fact that he'd memorized Enzo's preferences, didn't like being too warm, calmed down faster with gentle bouncing than rocking, made a particular sound when he was about to cry versus just fussing. "You're good at this," she said during the 4th visit, watching Adriano feed Enzo while discussing teething symptoms with Susan like he'd been studying for a medical exam. He glanced up, surprised. "I'm trying. It shows." She hesitated. "He's starting to recognize you. The way he looks at you changed." Adriano looked down at Enzo, who was indeed watching him with that intense infant focus that suggested brain connections forming, patterns being recognized. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Mara's voice softened despite herself. "You're becoming familiar to him." Something in Adriano's expression cracked open, just briefly, before he controlled it. But Mara saw it anyway, the raw need to matter to this small person, to be more than a stranger with supervised access, to build something real out of the wreckage of everything he'd destroyed. Susan documented it all, the progression, the consistency, the way Adriano showed up, not just physically, but emotionally, engaging with the difficult work of learning to be present without controlling, protective without imprisoning. After the 4th visit, as Mara was packing up, Susan pulled her aside. "He's doing well, better than most fathers in similar situations." "I know." Mara zipped the diaper bag with more force than necessary. "Does that bother you?" "It bothers me that it took losing everything for him to finally show up the right way." She paused. "It bothers me that I had to run, had to hide a pregnancy, had to face childbirth alone before he understood what I'd been trying to tell him for 2 years. Susan nodded. "That's valid. But he is showing up now. The question is what you want to do with that." Mara looked through the observation window where Adriano was still visible, carefully settling Enzo back into the carrier, checking straps twice to ensure they were secure. "I don't know what I want. I know what Enzo needs. A father who's safe, consistent, present. But I don't know if that's who Adriano actually is, or just who he's performing for the court." "Time will tell," Susan said. "Keep watching, keep documenting, trust the process." That evening, Mara returned to the small apartment she'd rented in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, aging appliances, neighbors who played music too loud on weekends. But it was hers, her name on the lease, her decisions about who entered, her life, finally, without surveillance or guards or someone monitoring her every movement. She fed Enzo, changed him, settled him in the bassinet beside her bed. He was sleeping better now, longer stretches at night, though she still woke up constantly to check that he was breathing, that he was safe, that the fragile peace she'd built wasn't about to shatter. Her phone buzzed. A text from Diane Foster, court date scheduled for custody review, 6 weeks from Thursday. Judge wants to evaluate progress and discuss potential modification of visitation terms. Mara stared at the message, heart racing. Modification could mean anything. More visits, longer visits, unsupervised visits. The slow erosion of the boundaries that kept her feeling safe. Or it could mean acknowledgement that Adriano was actually changing, that Enzo deserved more than 2 hours twice a week with his father, that their son's needs were evolving faster than the court's original restrictions. She didn't know which possibility terrified her more. Across the city, Adriano sat in his attorney's office, listening to Marcus outline the same information with significantly more legal jargon and strategic implications. "The judge is clearly leaning toward expanding access," Marcus said, reviewing documents. "Your consistent attendance, completion of all requirements, Positive reports from the social worker. It's building a strong case for unsupervised visitation. What does Mara want? Adriano asked. Marcus blinked. What? Mara. What does she want regarding custody modification? I don't know. Her attorney hasn't indicated. Find out. Adriano leaned forward. I'm not fighting her on this. If she's not comfortable with unsupervised visits, I'm not pushing for them. Adriano, you have rights as a father. The court has already acknowledged the initial restrictions were based on her testimony, which was accurate. Adriano cut him off. Everything she said about how I treated her was true, so I'm not using legal strategy to force access she's not ready to give. Marcus set down his pen with deliberate precision. You're my client, and I respect your choices, but I need to point out that you're essentially conceding ground you've already won. I haven't won anything. Adriano stood, moving to the window that overlooked Manhattan's evening skyline. Winning would be Enzo knowing me without court orders, Mara trusting me without supervision, a relationship built on something other than legal requirements. He turned back. So stop thinking about this like a case to win and start thinking about it like a family to rebuild. Marcus studied him for a long moment. You've changed. I'm trying to. Adriano pulled out his phone, scrolling to photos from the last visitation. Enzo asleep on his shoulder, that perfect weight, that absolute trust. I spent 10 years building an empire. I can spend the next 10 learning to be a decent father. He left the office and headed to his next appointment. Doctor. Winter's brownstone was becoming familiar territory, a place where he could strip away the armor he wore everywhere else and admit to the fear that lived underneath everything. Tell me about this week, Dr. Winter said once he'd settled on her couch. I held my son for 2 hours on Tuesday, 4 hours total this week, and every second I'm terrified I'm going to do something wrong. The words came easier now, after weeks of practice. Not wrong like dropping him or forgetting to burp him, wrong like teaching him the wrong lessons, showing him the wrong model of what strength looks like. What does strength look like to you now? Adriano was quiet, considering. Mara leaving took more strength than staying ever did. She was pregnant, alone, terrified, and she still chose the unknown over my version of safety. That's strength. And what does that tell you about your old definition? That it was bullshit. He smiled without humor. I thought strength was control, power over circumstances, over people, over outcomes, but that's not strength. That's just fear wearing expensive suits. Dr. Winters leaned back. Fear of what? Losing people, losing control, being vulnerable. He paused. My grandfather's wife left him once. She packed a bag, made it to the airport, and he had her brought back. Not violently, just brought back. Security, lawyers, pressure on her family. She never tried again. She stayed until she died, and I'm pretty sure she was grateful when it finally ended. And you saw that growing up. I saw that love meant ownership, that if you really cared about someone, you made sure they couldn't leave. You protected them from themselves, from their bad decisions, from anything that might take them away from you. His hands clenched. I saw it, recognized it was wrong, swore I'd never do it, and then did exactly the same thing to Mara. But you stopped. She made me stop. By leaving. By refusing to come back. By showing up in that courtroom with my son and making it impossible to pretend I hadn't destroyed everything that mattered. Dr. Winters was quiet for a moment. What are you afraid of now? That I'll get more access to Enzo and default back to old patterns. That I'll start making decisions about his life without consulting Mara. That I'll confuse protecting him with controlling him. He met her eyes. That I'll turn him into another version of me. And what would be different about that? He'd be powerful, successful, probably wealthy. He'd know how to navigate dangerous situations and difficult people. Adriano's voice went quiet. And he'd be completely incapable of real intimacy. He'd drive away anyone who actually loved him because he wouldn't know how to love them back without trying to own them. So how do you prevent that? I don't know. The admission came easier now, after weeks of practice. That's why I'm here. That's why I show up to every session, every class, every appointment, because I don't have the answers, and I'm finally okay admitting that. They worked through exercises about emotional regulation, about recognizing the difference between appropriate protection and excessive control, about building relationships based on trust instead of authority. When the session ended, Adriano felt wrung out and somehow lighter, like lancing a wound that had been festering for decades. He was walking to his car when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then recognized the pattern. Secured line, encrypted call. Only a handful of people had access to this particular number. He answered. "What?" "We have a problem." The voice belonged to his second-in-command, Victor. "The Merinos hit one of our supply lines. Took out 3 trucks, sent a message." "What message?" "That you're distracted, weak, and they're taking territory while you're playing father." Adriano's jaw tightened. "They're wrong." "Are they?" Victor's tone carried challenge. "You've missed 4 strategic meetings. You pulled protection from the docks. You're divesting from half our revenue streams. The families are circling, Adriano. They smell blood." "Let them circle." He unlocked his car, slid into the driver's seat. "I'm done playing their games. This isn't a game. This is survival. If you don't respond to the Merinos, everyone else is going to test you. We'll be defending on 12 fronts by next month." "Then defend." Adriano started the engine. "Use the legal channels, the contracts, the legitimate partnerships I've been building. Fight them the right way." "The right way gets people killed when the other side isn't playing by rules." "Then maybe it's time we change the game entirely." He pulled into traffic. "I want a meeting with Marco Merino. Direct. No intermediaries." Victor made a sound of disbelief. "You want to negotiate with the people who just cost us $500,000 in product and damages?" "I want to offer them a deal. They take over the territories I'm vacating. Clean transfer, no bloodshed, in exchange for staying out of my remaining operations." "You're giving them territory?" "I'm giving them what they were going to try to take anyway, but on my terms, with my conditions, in a way that leaves me free to focus on what actually matters." Silence. Then carefully, "The family's not going to like this." "The family doesn't get a vote." Adriano's voice hardened. "I'm done living according to rules written by men who thought love was a weakness and control was a virtue." "Set up the meeting." He disconnected before Victor could argue further. The next few days passed in a blur of activity that felt simultaneously mundane and earth-shattering. Adriano attended another visitation with Enzo, this time successfully navigating a diaper blowout that required complete outfit change and significant cleanup. He met with Marco Merino in a neutral restaurant, negotiated territory transfer with the same cold efficiency he'd once used to expand his empire, and walked away with an agreement that gave him breathing room to continue transformation without constant attacks. He attended 2 therapy sessions, completed another parenting module about infant development milestones, and spent an entire evening reading articles about secure attachment and emotional availability. And through it all, he thought about Mara, about the 6-week review coming up, about what she must be feeling watching him show up consistently for the first time in their entire relationship. On Thursday afternoon, during their regular visitation, Susan pulled him aside while Mara fed Enzo. "I'm going to recommend unsupervised visits in my report to the judge," she said quietly. Adriano's pulse jumped. "You think I'm ready?" "I think you've demonstrated consistent engagement, appropriate boundaries, and genuine commitment to learning. You've exceeded every requirement." She paused. "But that's my professional assessment. What matters more is whether Mrs. Hale feels safe with it. And if she doesn't, then I'll recommend graduated transition, supervised visits that gradually extend in length and privacy. Whatever pace makes her comfortable." Adriano looked through the observation window at Mara, who was burping Enzo with practiced deficiency while humming something soft and melodic. "Ask her what she wants. Whatever her answer is, that's what I want in the report." Susan raised an eyebrow. "Most fathers in your position would be pushing for maximum access. Most fathers in my position probably didn't drive their wives into hiding." He met her eyes. "I'm not interested in legal maximums. I'm interested in what's actually safe for my son and what his mother can live with." After the session, as Mara was gathering her things, Adriano stopped her. "Can we talk? Just for a minute?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." They moved to the hallway, away from Susan's documentation and the camera's recording. Enzo was asleep in his carrier, oblivious to the tension crackling between his parents. "Susan's going to recommend unsupervised visits," Adriano said. Mara's grip tightened on the carrier handle. I know, she told me. I told her to ask you what you want. Whatever you're comfortable with, that's what should happen. She studied him, searching for manipulation, for strategy, for some hidden angle. Why? Because your comfort matters. Because Enzo needs you feeling safe more than he needs me having maximum access. Because I'm trying to do this right, and doing it right means prioritizing your needs, not my wants. This feels like a trick. It's not. He kept his hands visible, his body language open. I'm not fighting you anymore, Mara. I'm not trying to win or control or force outcomes. I'm just trying to be someone our son can trust, and that starts with being someone you can trust. She was quiet for a long moment, eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I ever can again. I know. The words hurt to say, but they were true. And that's okay. You don't have to trust me. You just have to tell me what you need and I'll respect it. I need time. Her voice cracked slightly. I need to see that this is real. That you're not just performing until you get what you want and then defaulting back to who you were. Then take all the time you need. We'll keep supervised visits, or we'll do graduated transition, or whatever else makes you feel safe. He paused. I'm not going anywhere, Mara. I'm going to keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep proving this is real, however long it takes. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned away before he could see her cry. Adriano watched her leave, carrying their son toward the elevator, disappearing behind closing doors. Every instinct he had screamed to follow, to fix, to control the outcome. But he stayed where he was, breathing through the helplessness, remembering Dr. Winter's voice. Letting go of control is the most powerful thing you can do. He went home to the penthouse that felt emptier every day, made dinner he barely tasted, reviewed business reports that mattered less with each passing week, and then he did something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He called his mother. Celeste answered with her usual cool efficiency. I wondered when you'd reach out. I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear it. Adriano kept his voice level. You don't get access to Enzo, not now, probably not ever. And before you argue, you need to understand why. I'm listening. Her tone suggested she was doing no such thing, but Adriano continued anyway. You taught me that love was conditional, that family loyalty mattered more than individual happiness, that weakness was unacceptable and vulnerability was shameful. You taught me to control circumstances and people, to manage outcomes, to eliminate risk even if it meant eliminating freedom. He paused. And those lessons destroyed my marriage. They drove away the woman I loved. They're the reason I'm fighting for supervised access to my own son. I taught you to survive. Celeste's voice hardened. I taught you to protect what matters. No, you taught me to protect the empire, the reputation, the appearance of power. But you never taught me to protect people's humanity, their autonomy, their right to exist without being managed like assets. That's not fair, Adriano. Everything I did was exactly what your mother-in-law did to you, he interrupted, and what my grandfather did to my grandmother, and what every generation of Vescari men has done to the women they claim to love. But it ends with me. Silence stretched across the line. I'm done, Adriano said quietly. I'm done with the family business as it exists. I'm done with the control and the violence and the justifications. I'm done repeating cycles that destroy people. He paused. And I'm done letting you anywhere near my son until you understand why that matters. You can't, Celeste started. I can, and I am. He softened slightly. I don't hate you, Mom, but I can't have you in Enzo's life teaching him the same lessons that nearly destroyed mine. So until you're ready to examine your own patterns, until you're willing to do the work of changing, you're not welcome. He ended the call before she could respond, blocked the number, and sat in the silence that followed. It should have felt like victory, cutting off the toxic patterns, establishing boundaries, protecting his son from the generational trauma he was still unpacking in therapy. Instead, it felt like grief, because Celeste was still his mother, still the woman who'd raised him alone after his father died, still the only parent he had left, flawed and controlling and damaged by her own history of being managed like an asset. But grief was better than repetition. Loss was better than passing poison to another generation. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Winters. Proud of you for having that conversation. Remember, boundaries are love in action, even when they hurt. He stared at the message, then typed back. It hurts a lot. Her response came immediately. That's how you know it's real growth. Comfortable change isn't really change, it's just rearranging furniture. Adriano smiled despite himself, then set the phone down and pulled out his laptop. He had work to do, not the empire-building kind, but the kind that actually mattered. Research on child development, articles about co-parenting after separation, resources for fathers learning to show up after failing spectacularly. He read until his eyes burned, took notes like he was studying for the most important exam of his life. Because in a way, he was. Every visitation was a test. Every choice about respect versus control was a question he had to answer correctly. Every moment with Enzo was an opportunity to prove he could be different than what he'd been. 2 weeks later, the courtroom felt different. Less circus, more solemn procedure. Judge Reyes reviewed reports from Susan Chen, documentation from Dr. Winters, statements from Diane Foster and Marcus Hale. She asked Adriano direct questions about his parenting education, his therapy progress, his understanding of the boundaries Mara needed. He answered honestly. About his failures. About the work he was doing. About his commitment to earning trust instead of demanding it. Then Judge Reyes turned to Mara. Mrs. Hale, you've heard the reports and Mr. Vescari's testimony. What are your thoughts on modifying the visitation arrangement? Mara stood, Enzo sleeping against her shoulder. She looked tired, uncertain, but stronger than she'd been 6 weeks ago in this same courtroom. I think he's trying, she said quietly. I think the effort is real, but I'm not ready for unsupervised visits yet. Adriano's expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed. No fight, no argument, just acceptance. Judge Reyes nodded. What would you be comfortable with? Graduated transition, longer supervised visits first, then supervised visits in less formal settings, parks maybe, or family-friendly restaurants. Places where we can see how he handles real-world parenting, not just controlled environments. She paused. And I want him to continue therapy and parenting education, not because the court requires it, but because he chooses it. Mr. Vescari? Judge Reyes looked at him. Do you have any objections to Mrs. Hale's proposal? None. His voice was steady. Whatever makes her comfortable. The judge reviewed her notes, then delivered her ruling. Extended supervised visits, 4 hours, 3 times a week. Permission for outdoor locations and public spaces, still with Susan Chen or another approved supervisor present. Continuation of all therapeutic and educational requirements. Review in another 6 weeks to assess progress toward unsupervised access. The gavel came down. Adriano walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight, alone again, and felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Not because he'd gotten what he wanted. He hadn't, not really. But because Mara had been honest about her needs and he'd respected them. Because the system was working the way it should, protecting the vulnerable while allowing space for change. Because his son was safe, and his son's mother felt empowered to set boundaries instead of running. That was worth more than any legal victory. His phone buzzed. Victor. The Marino deal is holding, but the Petrovas are asking questions about your long-term plans. They want to know if you're in or out. Adriano typed back. Tell them I'm out. Clean exit. Negotiated terms. No drama. I'm done with that world. Victor's response took longer. You're serious about this. Completely. Find buyers for everything that can't be legitimized. Set up the foundation like we discussed. I want to be fully transitioned within 6 months. The family's going to lose their minds. The family will adapt or they won't. Either way, I'm done living according to their rules. He pocketed the phone and headed toward his car, where his driver waited with patient neutrality. But before he reached it, he heard his name. Adriano? He turned. Mara stood on the courthouse steps, Enzo still sleeping against her shoulder, Diane Foster nowhere in sight. His heart stuttered. Is everything okay? I wanted to say something, away from lawyers and judges and documentation. She descended the steps carefully, stopping a few feet away. You could have fought the custody arrangement. You have resources, connections, attorneys who could have torn apart my testimony and made me look unstable. I would never. I know. She cut him off gently. That's what I'm trying to say. You didn't. You respected my boundaries. You did the work without being forced. You showed up for him without trying to own us. Her eyes were bright. That matters. It's the bare minimum of decent behavior. Maybe, but it's more than I expected from you 6 weeks ago. She shifted Enzo slightly. So, thank you for trying, for being consistent, for not making this harder than it already is. Adriano wanted to close the distance between them, to touch her face, to pull her close, and apologize for every moment of the 2 years he'd made her feel like a prisoner. But he stayed where he was, respecting the space she needed. I'm going to keep trying, he said quietly. Keep showing up, keep doing the work. However long it takes to prove this is real. She nodded, eyes searching his face for something she couldn't quite name. I believe you. The words seemed to surprise her as much as him. I'm not ready to trust you, but I believe you're trying, and that's something. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the city with their son, leaving Adriano standing on the courthouse steps, feeling both devastated and strangely hopeful, because belief was the first step toward trust, and trust was what he needed to earn if he ever wanted to be more than a supervised visitor in his son's life. He got in the car and headed home, past the penthouse, past the office, past all the monuments to the empire he was systematically dismantling. Instead, he drove to a small park in Brooklyn where children played on swings and parents watched from benches. He sat there for an hour, watching families, studying how fathers interacted with sons, observing the casual affection and easy trust that came from showing up consistently without trying to control every outcome. And he made a promise to the son who wasn't there to hear it. He would become that kind of father, the kind who showed up without agenda, who protected without imprisoning, who loved without needing to own, however long it took, whatever it cost. Even if Mara never trusted him again, even if he spent years in supervised visits earning inches of progress, even if he had to completely destroy the empire his grandfather built to create space for something healthier, he would do it, because Enzo deserved a father who chose him over power, and Adriano Vescari was finally ready to become that man. The extended visit started the following week. 4 hours, 3 times per week, alternating between the Children's Services Office and supervised outings to parks, family restaurants, and public spaces where Adriano could learn to navigate fatherhood in the messy reality of the world instead of controlled environments. Susan Chen documented everything with clinical precision, but even she couldn't hide the gradual shift in dynamics. The way Enzo lit up when Adriano arrived, tiny arms reaching before conscious recognition, should have developed. The way Mara's shoulders loosened incrementally each session, her vigilance softening as Adriano proved himself capable of handling diaper emergencies and feeding schedules without constant supervision. But the real test came on a cold March afternoon when everything nearly fell apart. They were at Prospect Park, Adriano, Mara, Enzo, and Susan observing from a respectful distance. Enzo was 10 weeks old now, more alert, tracking faces and sounds with increasing focus. Adriano pushed the stroller along the path while Mara walked beside him, the awkward silence between them filled with bird calls and distant children's laughter. "He's getting bigger," Adriano said, searching for neutral territory. 3 ounces last week. Mara pulled her jacket tighter against the wind. "The pediatrician says he's right on track." "You found a good doctor?" "Diane helped me connect with a clinic that works with women in transition. They've been incredible." She paused. "They don't ask questions about why I needed a protected address or why his father wasn't at appointments." The words stung, but Adriano absorbed them without defense. "I'm glad you found good care." They walked in silence for another minute. Then Mara spoke again, voice quieter. "I signed the divorce papers. Diane filed them yesterday." Adriano's steps faltered briefly before he recovered. "Okay? That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say?" He kept his eyes on the path ahead. "That I'm devastated our marriage is ending? I destroyed it long before you signed anything. The paperwork is just making official what I killed 2 years ago." Mara studied his profile. This man who'd once seemed so certain of everything, now navigating every conversation like he was crossing a minefield. "Do you regret marrying me?" "No." The answer came immediately, absolute. I regret how I treated you. I regret every choice I made that taught you my love was dangerous. But I don't regret marrying you. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too broken to recognize it until you were gone." She looked away, blinking rapidly. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Say things that make me remember why I fell for you in the first place." Her voice cracked. "It was easier when you were just the villain, just the man who controlled me and broke me and drove me away. But then you show up here week after week, doing the work, being present, saying things that sound like the man I thought I married before I learned who you really were." "Maybe I'm both," Adriano said quietly. "The villain and the man you married. Maybe I've always been both. And you're just seeing the whole picture now instead of the version I wanted you to see." Before Mara could respond, a car pulled up to the curb 20 feet ahead. Black sedan, tinted windows, engine running. Two men got out, thick builds, expensive suits that didn't quite hide the bulges of concealed weapons. Adriano's entire body went rigid. He recognized them immediately. Petrov enforcers. The Russian syndicate that had been testing his boundaries since he'd started divesting from the family business. Susan noticed his reaction and started moving closer, phone already out. "Is there a problem?" "Take them." Adriano's voice was steel as he looked at Mara. "Take Enzo and go with Susan. Now." "What's happening?" Mara's hand went to the stroller protectively. "Now, Mara." His tone brooked no argument, the commanding presence she remembered from their marriage bleeding through. "Please." The men were approaching, hands visible but posture radiating threat. Susan made a quick assessment, then gripped Mara's arm. "Come on, let's give them space." Mara wanted to argue, but something in Adriano's expression, fear, not for himself but for them, made her nod. She grabbed the stroller and let Susan guide her away, glancing back every few steps to see Adriano facing down the two men with the kind of cold presence that reminded her exactly who he'd been before therapy and parenting classes. The older enforcer spoke first, accent thick. "Mr. Vescari, been trying to reach you." "I've been busy." Adriano's voice was level, dangerous. "This is a public park. Families are here. You need to leave." "We need to discuss your recent business decisions." The man smiled without warmth. "Mr. Petrov is concerned about the territories you're abandoning. He wants to ensure proper transition." "Tell Petrov the territories are his if he wants them. Clean handoff, no interference, as long as he stays away from my remaining operations and anyone connected to me personally." "Generous offer." The second enforcer spoke now, younger, meaner. "But Mr. Petrov wonders what guarantee he has you won't change your mind. You've been unpredictable lately." "My word is the guarantee." "Your word." The younger man laughed. "Forgive us if that feels insufficient. We were thinking something more concrete. Insurance." Adriano's jaw tightened as he understood the implication. "No. We're not asking for much. Just information. Names, addresses, connections. The people who matter to you." The enforcer's gaze drifted toward where Mara and Susan had retreated with the stroller. "Pretty woman. Beautiful baby. Would be a shame if—" He didn't finish the sentence because Adriano moved with the kind of speed that came from years of surviving in violent worlds. One hand locked around the man's throat, the other twisting his wrist at an angle that would snap bones if pressure increased. The older enforcer reached for his weapon, but Adriano's voice stopped him cold. "Touch that gun, and I break his wrist, collapse his windpipe, and disappear before police arrive. Your choice." The park had gone quiet. People were staring. Someone had a phone out, filming. This was about to become a spectacle that would destroy months of careful progress. Adriano forced himself to breathe, to release the enforcer before he did permanent damage. He stepped back, hands visible, voice dropping to lethal quiet. "You go back to Petrov and you tell him this. I'm out, completely out. He can have everything I'm leaving behind with my blessing. But anyone who threatens my son or his mother dies. Not eventually, not as part of some strategic plan. Immediately, messily, in ways that send a message to every other syndicate thinking about testing me." "Big talk for a man playing father in a park," the younger enforcer spat, rubbing his throat. "It's not talk." Adriano's smile was cold, empty. the expression of a man who'd done terrible things and could do them again without hesitation. Ask the Marinos what happened to their lieutenant who tried to use my ex-wife for leverage. Oh, wait, you can't, because they're still finding pieces. It was a bluff. He hadn't killed anyone, had in fact negotiated peaceful territory transfer. But the Petrovas didn't know that. They only knew his reputation, the stories that preceded him, the legend of a man who'd built an empire through calculated violence. The older enforcer put a hand on his colleague's shoulder. "We'll deliver your message, Mr. Vescari." "See that you do." Adriano didn't move until both men were back in the car, until the sedan pulled away and disappeared into traffic. Then he turned to find Mara standing 10 feet away, Enzo in her arms, Susan beside her looking professionally concerned and personally alarmed. "What the hell was that?" Mara's voice shook with anger and fear. "Who were those men? What did they want?" "People from my old life, making sure I understand the terms of my exit." Adriano's hands were trembling now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I thought I'd handled this, thought I'd negotiated clean transitions, but clearly you're still exactly who I ran from." Mara's eyes blazed. "You just threatened to kill people in a public park 20 feet from our son. You put your hands on someone. I protected you." Adriano cut her off, voice ragged. "They were threatening you. Threatening Enzo. What was I supposed to do? Politely ask them to leave?" "You were supposed to not have a life where Russian enforcers show up at parks making threats." She was crying now, fury and terror mixing. "You were supposed to be different, to have changed, but you're still that man, still living in a world where violence is the answer, where my son is a target because of who his father is." Susan stepped forward. "Let's all take a breath, Mrs. Hele, why don't we get Enzo somewhere quiet? I want him away from this." Mara looked at Adriano with something close to hate. "Away from you. Away from whatever world you live in that follows us to parks and threatens my baby." "Mara, please, say, don't." She held up a hand. "Just don't. I tried to believe you were changing. I wanted to believe it, but you can't change who you fundamentally are. And who you are puts my son in danger." She turned and walked away, Susan following with apologetic backward glances, leaving Adriano standing alone on the path while curious onlookers whispered and filmed and documented the spectacular implosion of his carefully constructed redemption. He stood there for a long time after they'd gone, watching the space where his son had been, feeling the weight of every choice he'd ever made crushing down on his chest. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Victor answered immediately. "What happened? I've got reports of an incident. I need a full security detail on Mara and Enzo. Discreet. They never know it's there, but 24/7 protection from anyone who might use them as leverage." "Adriano, if she finds out you're having her watched," "She won't find out because it won't be surveillance. It's protection. There's a difference." His voice was iron. "And I need you to send a message to every syndicate, every family, every criminal enterprise that might think about touching them. Make it clear that they're completely off limits, untouchable, that anyone who even looks at them wrong disappears." "That's going to burn a lot of bridges." "Burn them all. I don't care. My son's safety is non-negotiable." He ended the call and made another. Dr. Winters answered on the third ring. "I need an emergency session." Adriano's voice cracked. "I just destroyed everything. Again." "Come to the office. I'll make time." An hour later, he sat on her familiar couch, staring at his hands, reliving the moment when instinct had overridden months of careful change. "I grabbed him," Adriano said quietly. "Someone threatened my son, and I reacted like the man I used to be. Not the father I'm trying to become. The enforcer. The criminal. The man who solves problems with violence." "You were protecting your child from a credible threat, Doctor," Winters said carefully. "That's not the same as the controlling behavior that drove Mara away." "Isn't it? I made a decision about their safety without consulting her. I responded with physical force. I sent her son, our son, the message that violence is how we handle difficult situations." He looked up. "And now she's going to take away access because I proved her right. I am still that man." "Are you?" Dr. Winters leaned forward. "Or are you a man who's still learning to navigate the space between appropriate protection and excessive control?" Who made a split-second decision when his child was threatened and is now examining that decision with genuine remorse? Does the distinction matter? Enzo was still exposed to violence. Mara still saw me become the man she ran from. It matters because growth isn't linear, Adriano. It's messy. You're going to have moments where old patterns emerge, especially in crisis situations. The question is what you do after those moments. I don't know what to do. The admission came out broken. I've spent 3 months doing everything right, showing up, respecting boundaries, doing the work, and one moment destroyed it all. Did it? Or did it just reveal that you still have work to do? That the world you're trying to leave doesn't let go easily? She paused. You can't control how Mara reacts to what happened today, but you can control how you respond to her reaction. He thought about that, about the terror he'd felt watching those men approach, knowing what they represented, understanding viscerally that his past would always be a threat to his son's present, about Mara's face when she'd seen him grab the enforcer, the way hope had died in her eyes. She'll never trust me now, he said quietly. Maybe not today, maybe not next week. But if you continue showing up, continue doing the work, continue proving that you understand the difference between protection and control, she might trust you eventually. Dr. Winters met his eyes. The question is whether you're willing to keep trying even when it feels hopeless. Adriano left the session with no clear answers, just the determination to keep showing up even if Mara wanted him gone. He drove home through evening traffic, watching the city lights blur past, thinking about the impossible task of building trust after destroying it so completely. His phone rang. Diane Foster. He answered with trepidation. I know she wants to suspend visits, I understand, but please tell her she doesn't want to suspend visits, Diane interrupted. She wants to talk to you, in person, tonight. Adriano's pulse jumped. Where? Her apartment. She's making an exception to the protected address, because she says this conversation needs to happen without supervisors or documentation. A pause. I'm going to text you the address. But Adriano, if you do anything to make her regret this decision, I will personally ensure you never see your son again. Are we clear? Crystal. The address came through moments later. A modest building in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, the kind of place where people lived normal lives far removed from penthouse fortresses and criminal empires. Adriano stood outside her door for a full minute before knocking, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the terrifying vulnerability of caring what someone thought of him. Mara opened the door. She looked exhausted, eyes red from crying, but composed. Come in. The apartment was small but carefully made into a home. Books on shelves, photos on walls, Enzo's bassinet visible through the bedroom door. It smelled like her. That faint scent of jasmine and something clean he'd never been able to name. He's sleeping, she said quietly. We have maybe an hour before he wakes up. Adriano stood awkwardly in the tiny living room, this space that was wholly hers, built without him, representing the life she'd chosen over everything he could offer. Sit. She gestured to the couch. We need to talk. He sat. She remained standing, arms crossed, that defensive posture he remembered from their marriage whenever she'd gathered courage to confront him. I've been thinking about today, she started. About what happened. About my reaction. About everything. Mara, I'm sorry. Let me finish. Her voice was firm. I saw you grab that man and I panicked, because for a second you looked exactly like the person I ran from. Violent, controlling, dangerous. And my first instinct was to protect Enzo from you. Adriano's chest tightened, but he stayed silent. But then I got home and I replayed it in my mind. Really looked at what happened instead of just reacting. She paused. You didn't hit him. You restrained him until the threat passed, then let him go. You sent us away first, made sure we were safe before engaging, and you didn't escalate beyond what was necessary to end the situation. I still used violence. You defended us. She cut him off. Those men were threatening your son, our son, and you responded like a father protecting his child, not like a crime boss eliminating opposition. Adriano stared at her, not quite believing what he was hearing. I'm not saying it was perfect, Mara continued. I'm not saying I'm comfortable with any part of your old life showing up in parks, but I'm saying I understand the difference between what you did today and what you used to do. She finally sat down, across from him, maintaining distance. The old Adriano would have had those men disappeared, would have used the threat as justification to increase control over me and Enzo, to restrict our movements, to make decisions about our safety without consulting me. I did make decisions without consulting you, he admitted. I put protection on you both. Discreet, you'll never see them, but they're there. And I sent messages to every organization that might think about using you as leverage. He expected anger. Instead, Mara nodded slowly. I know. You know? Diane told me. She has connections that monitor these things. She said the word went out within hours. We're untouchable. That threatening us means death, no negotiations, no exceptions. Mara looked at him directly. That terrifies me, Adriano. The fact that my son needs that kind of protection because of who his father is. But it also tells me something. What? That you're willing to burn every bridge in your old world to keep us safe. That you understand the protection has to be invisible, not intrusive. That you told me about it instead of hiding it. She paused. The old you would have just implemented everything without mentioning it. Would have justified the secrecy as protecting me from worry. Adriano was quiet for a moment. I'm trying to be different, but I don't always know where the line is. Between appropriate protection and excessive control. Between keeping you safe and taking away your autonomy. Neither do I, Mara admitted. But at least you're asking the question now instead of just deciding you know best. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 months' progress balanced against the reality of a world that didn't let people leave cleanly. I want to show you something. Mara stood, disappeared into the bedroom, and returned with a folder. She handed it to him. Adriano opened it. Legal documents, business and corporation papers, a lease agreement. What is this? I'm starting a nonprofit, translation and advocacy services for immigrant women trying to escape domestic violence or coercive relationships. Her voice was steady, strong. I'm using the skills I had before I met you. The languages. The understanding of what it's like to feel trapped. The knowledge of how to disappear when you need to. Adriano looked up at her, stunned. Mara, this is incredible. I want to turn what happened to me into something that helps other women. I want Enzo to grow up seeing his mother as someone who survived and then use that survival to make the world safer for people like her. She paused. But I need funding, office space, legal support, and I need it from sources that aren't connected to criminal enterprises or questionable money. I can help with that. Adriano's mind was already moving through legitimate business contacts, foundation connections, legal resources. I have investors who are completely clean, businesses that have nothing to do with my family history. I can connect you with, I don't want your connections. Mara's voice was gentle, but firm. I want you to teach me how to build those connections myself. I want to learn to navigate that world without being dependent on you or anyone else. Understanding dawned. You want to be partners, not in the romantic sense, but in the practical sense. I want to show Enzo that his parents can work together, that we can respect each other's boundaries while still supporting each other's goals, that divorce doesn't mean destruction. She met his eyes. Can you do that? Can you help me build something without taking it over? Can you offer support without making me dependent? Adriano thought about all the times he'd failed to do exactly that. All the ways he'd confused helping with controlling, supporting with managing, loving with owning. I don't know, he said honestly, but I want to try. Mara smiled, just barely. That's all I'm asking, the willingness to try. A sound came from the bedroom, Enzo waking up, making those small, fussy noises that preceded real crying. Do you want to get him? Mara asked. Are you sure? You're his father, and this is a safe space, our space. I think it's time you saw where your son actually lives, instead of only knowing him in supervised environments. Adriano stood, moved carefully to the bedroom. Enzo was awake in his bassinet, tiny fists waving. When he saw Adriano, his face lit up with recognition that made something in Adriano's chest crack open. He lifted his son carefully, supporting his head the way he'd practiced 100 times, and carried him back to the living room. Mara had prepared a bottle. They settled on the couch together, not quite touching, but not maintaining the careful distance of supervised visits either. Adriano fed Enzo while Mara talked about her nonprofit plans, about the women she wanted to help, about the kind of world she wanted to build for their son. He listened, asked questions, offered suggestions without bulldozing, learning the delicate balance of support without control. And for the first time since the courtroom disaster 3 months ago, it felt like they were actually building something. Not a marriage that was over, signed away in divorce papers that would finalize in a few more weeks, but a partnership, a co-parenting relationship, a foundation for Enzo that didn't require his parents to be together, just to be respectful and present. When Enzo finished eating, Adriano burped him, changed him, and held him while Mara made tea in her tiny kitchen. This quiet domestic moment felt more valuable than any empire he'd ever built, more real than any power he'd ever wielded. "I'm scared," Mara said suddenly from the kitchen doorway. "Of what?" "That this is temporary, that you'll default back to old patterns when things get hard, that Enzo will grow up caught between the father who's trying to change and the father you actually are." "I'm scared of that too," Adriano admitted. "Every day I'm terrified I'm going to wake up and realize I've been performing instead of actually changing. That the control and the violence and the need to manage every outcome is still there, just buried deeper." "How do we know?" Mara came back to the couch, sitting closer this time. "How do we know if this is real or just another phase?" "We don't." He looked down at Enzo, peaceful in his arms. "All we can do is keep showing up, keep checking in, keep being honest about when we're struggling." He met her eyes. "And maybe that's enough. Maybe being uncertain but committed is better than being certain and destructive." Mara reached out hesitantly, then touched Enzo's tiny hand. Her fingers brushed Adriano's in the process, and neither of them pulled away. "I don't love you anymore," she said quietly. "I need you to know that. Whatever we build going forward, it's not reconciliation. It's not romance. It's just two people trying to raise a child together despite everything that went wrong between them." "I know." And he did. The knowledge hurt, but it was a clean pain, honest instead of festering. "I'll probably always love you, but I also understand I killed what we had. This is about Enzo, not about us. Can you live with that?" "I can live with anything if it means being part of his life." Adriano adjusted Enzo slightly, marveling at how natural the weight felt now. "I'd rather be his father on your terms than not be his father at all." They stayed like that for another hour, talking quietly while Enzo dozed, making plans for the nonprofit, discussing how to handle inevitable challenges, negotiating boundaries that respected both their needs. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't even particularly warm, but it was functional, respectful, and focused entirely on building the best possible foundation for their son. When Adriano finally left, stepping out into the cool night air, he felt different. Not fixed. He was too self-aware to think 3 months of work erased decades of dysfunction, but changed in ways that felt permanent, rooted in something deeper than performance or legal requirements. His phone buzzed. A text from Diane Foster. Mara called, said the conversation went well. Supervised visits continue as scheduled, but she's open to discussing unsupervised access if the next few weeks remain stable. Don't screw this up. Adriano smiled despite the exhaustion crushing down on him. He'd faced Russian enforcers, confronted his mother, dismantled criminal empires, and navigated an emotional conversation with his ex-wife without defaulting to control or manipulation. He'd survived the test, but the real test, he knew, was coming. Because the Petrovas weren't the only ones watching his exit from the criminal world. Other families were circling, sensing opportunity in his transformation, wondering if the legendary Adriano Vescari had truly gone soft, or if this was strategy wrapped in sentiment. And somewhere in the shadows of his old life, someone was planning to test his new boundaries in ways that would force him to choose between the father he was trying to become and the monster he'd always been. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, Adriano drove home through the quiet streets of Brooklyn, carrying the memory of his son's weight in his arms and his ex-wife's tentative trust, and felt something he'd never expected to feel after destroying his marriage and missing his son's birth. He felt hope. Fragile, uncertain, easily shattered, but real. And real was enough to build on. The attack came 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon when Adriano was supposed to meet Mara and Enzo at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden for their first unsupervised visit. He was running 5 minutes early, unusual traffic making the drive faster than anticipated, when his phone rang. Victor's name flashed across the screen. "Not now," Adriano said immediately. "I'm meeting my son." "They have her." Victor's voice was ice. "The Petrovas. They grabbed Mara 20 minutes ago. Left a message saying if you want her back alive, you meet them alone. No police, no backup." The world stopped. Adriano's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. "Enzo?" "With the babysitter at her apartment. Safe. They only took Mara." A pause. "This is retaliation, Adriano. For the threats you made, for the territories you abandoned, for making them look weak by walking away." "Where?" The word came out lethal, cold. Everything he'd been trying not to be for months condensing into single-minded purpose. "The old warehouse in Red Hook, where your grandfather used to conduct business." Victor's voice carried warning. "It's a trap. They want you emotional, angry, making mistakes. They want the old Adriano, not the father playing nice in supervised visits." "Then that's what they'll get." Adriano was already changing course, heading toward Red Hook, mind cataloging weapons, strategies, approaches. "Assemble the team. Full tactical. I want every exit covered, every advantage we can manufacture. Adriano, if you go in there like this, they took my son's mother. They threatened the woman who's trying to build a life away from my world. They made this about Enzo." His voice dropped to something dark and ancient. "So I'm going to remind them why people used to cross the street when they saw me coming." He disconnected, made another call. Diane Foster answered immediately. "I know," she said before he could speak. "I'm with Enzo now. Building security let me up when Mara didn't return on schedule. He's safe, fed, calm. But Adriano, I'm getting her back. The police can't move fast enough, and you know it. By the time they mobilize, negotiate, plan an entry, she's dead." He forced himself to breathe. "I need you to keep Enzo safe. Don't let anyone near him. Don't trust anyone except yourself until you hear from me or Mara directly." "What are you going to do?" "Whatever it takes." He ended the call before she could argue. The warehouse loomed against the gray sky like a monument to everything Adriano had been trying to leave behind. He'd spent his childhood here, watching his grandfather conduct business that ranged from legitimate shipping to considerably darker enterprises. The building was supposed to be abandoned now, sold off in the legitimate business transition. Clearly, someone had other plans. Victor was waiting in the shadows with 4 men Adriano recognized, former military, loyal not to the family but to Adriano personally, the kind of people who understood that some situations required precision violence. "They're inside, 3rd floor, main floor space. At least 6 hostiles that we can confirm, probably more." Victor handed Adriano a weapon. "She's alive. We got visual through the upper windows. They're using her as bait." "Then let's give them what they want." Adriano checked the gun with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from a life he'd tried to leave overriding months of therapy and parenting classes. "I go in the front. You take your team through the service entrance. Wait for my signal, then close the trap." "This is exactly what they want you to do." "I know." Adriano met his second's eyes. "But they made a critical miscalculation. They think the old Adriano was more dangerous than the new one. They're wrong." He entered through the main door, hands visible, weapon holstered but accessible. The warehouse floor was cavernous, empty except for support pillars and the detritus of abandoned industry. Light filtered through broken windows, casting shadows that moved with the wind. Mara was in the center of the space, zip-tied to a chair, a gag in her mouth. Her face was bruised, one eye swelling shut, blood dried at the corner of her mouth. But her eyes were alert, furious, tracking movement with the same careful awareness she'd shown in the courtroom months ago. 6 men surrounded her, weapons visible, confident in their numbers and position. The oldest one, Dmitry Petrov himself, the syndicate head who'd been testing Adriano's boundaries, stood closest to Mara, a knife playing through his fingers with casual menace. "Mr. Vescari," Dmitry's accent was thick, mocking. "So good of you to join us. We were beginning to think fatherhood had made you soft." "Let her go." Adriano's voice was empty of emotion, the kind of cold that preceded terrible violence. "Whatever point you're trying to make, she's not part of it." "But that's where you're wrong." Dmitri moved behind Mara's chair, knife blade resting against her throat. She's entirely the point. You wanted to leave our world, abandon territories, play family man, fine. But you don't get to threaten us, make us look weak, and then walk away without consequences. I offered you clean transition, territories, operations, connections, all of it, no fight, no bloodshed. You're the ones who decided to make this complicated. Because you made us look like we needed your permission. Dimitri's composure cracked slightly. The great Adriano Vescari, gifting us territories like we're children receiving allowance. You humiliated us. And this is your response? Kidnapping a woman who has nothing to do with business disputes? Threatening a mother? Adriano took a step closer, hands still visible. You're not making yourselves look stronger, Dimitri. You're making yourselves look desperate. The knife pressed harder against Mara's throat. A thin line of blood appeared. Adriano stopped moving. Careful. You draw any more blood, and this stops being a negotiation. What are you going to do? Dimitri laughed. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and your reputation for mercy is well documented lately. The old Adriano would have burned this building down with everyone inside. But the new Adriano, the father, the man in therapy? He leaned closer to Mara. I don't think he has it in him anymore. You're right, Adriano said quietly. The old Adriano would have killed everyone without conversation. He would have made this brutal, public, a message that discouraged future challenges. He paused, and his smile was terrible. The new Adriano is going to be much worse, because I have something to lose now. And men with everything to lose are significantly more dangerous than men with nothing but pride. He moved before Dimitri could process the threat, one hand going for his weapon while the other triggered the signal device in his pocket. Victor and the team burst through the service entrance with tactical precision. The warehouse exploded into chaos, but Adriano's focus remained singular. He put down two of Dimitri's men with shots that were clinical, efficient, designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Not mercy, just pragmatism. Dead men couldn't testify to kidnapping and assault when this inevitably became a legal matter. Dimitri yanked Mara up as a shield, knife still at her throat. Stop, or she dies. Adriano froze, weapon trained but unable to fire without risking her. Victor and the team had subdued the other enforcers, but Dimitri was backing toward a side exit, dragging Mara with him. You think you can leave this life? Dimitri shouted, desperation bleeding through. You think you can just walk away and build a normal existence? This world doesn't let people go, Vescari. It follows you. It infects everything you touch. Your son will grow up in shadows. Your woman will never be safe, and you'll always be looking over your shoulder. You're wrong. Adriano lowered his weapon slowly, deliberately. This world only has power if I let it. If I choose violence over law, revenge over justice, the old ways over new possibilities. What are you doing? Dimitri's confusion was evident. I'm choosing differently. Adriano pulled out his phone with his free hand, keeping movement slow and visible. I'm calling the police, the FBI, every legitimate authority who's been building a case against your organization for the past 18 months. I'm handing them a kidnapping, assault, and about 6 witnesses who will testify in exchange for reduced charges on their own crimes. You're bluffing. Am I? Adriano pressed dial, because the old Adriano would have killed you all and buried the evidence. The new Adriano recognizes that legal consequences are more permanent than street justice, that putting you in prison for 20 years is more effective than putting you in the ground. Dimitri's face went pale as he heard voices on the speakerphone. 911 dispatcher, already responding to the address Victor had sent from a different line. Police are 3 minutes out, Adriano continued, voice steady. FBI is 5. You can kill her and guarantee life in prison, or you can let her go and maybe negotiate a deal that doesn't end with you dying in a cell. He paused. Your choice, but choose fast. The knife trembled against Mara's throat. She was absolutely still, breathing shallow, eyes locked on Adriano's with trust he hadn't earned but desperately needed to honor. They'll never convict me, but Dimitri's voice lacked conviction. They will, because I'm going to testify. I'm going to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors. I'm going to give them everything they need about your operations, your connections, your money laundering through legitimate shipping. Adriano smiled without warmth. I was going to let you have my old territories and disappear quietly, but you made this personal. You threatened my son's mother, so now I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your life regretting that decision." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Dmitri made his choice. He released Mara, shoving her toward Adriano, and bolted for the exit. Victor moved to pursue, but Adriano held up a hand. "Let him run. Police will pick him up within the hour. I want him prosecuted, not martyred." He caught Mara as she stumbled, hands immediately going to the zip ties binding her wrists. Victor tossed him a knife, and he cut through the plastic, removed the gag, checking her for injuries with hands that shook despite his outward calm. "Are you hurt? Did they—" "I'm okay." Her voice was hoarse, rough from the gag. "Bruised, scared, but okay." She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "You came for me." "Of course I came for you. Did you think I wouldn't? You could have killed them all. The old you would have. But you chose the legal route, even when I was in danger, even when they deserved worse." She touched his face with trembling fingers. "You really have changed." Police burst through the doors, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Adriano raised his hand slowly, stepping away from his own weapon, making himself non-threatening even though every cell in his body screamed to fight, to protect, to control the situation. "My name is Adriano Vescari. I'm the one who called this in. The woman needs medical attention. The men on the floor are the kidnappers. I'm willing to give a full statement and cooperate completely with the investigation." The next hours passed in a blur of EMTs, police statements, FBI agents who arrived with recording equipment and very specific questions about Dmitry Petrov's organization. Adriano answered everything, holding nothing back, burning every bridge to his old life with testimonial napalm. Mara was treated for her injuries, minor cuts, bruising, shock, but nothing permanent. She insisted on staying for his interview, sitting beside him in the precinct conference room, silent support while he dismantled an empire. When it was finally over, when the agents had everything they needed and Dmitri was in custody along with 5 of his men, Adriano and Mara stepped out into dawn light. Neither had slept. Both looked like they'd survived something that should have destroyed them. "I need to see Enzo," Mara said immediately. "Diane has him. He's safe, fed." She sent updates every hour. Adriano pulled out his phone, showing her the photos. Enzo sleeping peacefully, unaware his mother had been in danger. Mara started crying then, the delayed shock finally hitting. Adriano pulled her close without thinking, and for the first time in months, she let him. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed while he held her, not with possession or control, but with the desperate gratitude of someone who'd almost lost something irreplaceable. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I'm so sorry my world touched you like this. I thought I'd handled the transition, thought I'd made it safe." "Stop!" She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You saved me. You chose the right way, even when the old way would have been easier. You proved that the change is real. It almost got you killed. But it didn't. And now those men are going to face actual justice instead of disappearing into rivers. Their organization is going to be dismantled through legal channels. You did it the right way, Adriano. The hard way. The way that protects our son from inheriting more violence." They went to Mara's apartment together, where Diane waited with Enzo. The attorney's relief was palpable as she handed over the baby. He was perfect, not a single moment of fuss. She looked at both of them, reading the story in their exhausted faces and careful movements. "I'll give you privacy. But Mara, when you're ready, we should discuss additional security measures." After she left, Mara and Adriano sat on the couch, with Enzo between them. The baby was awake, looking from one parent to the other with that intense focus that suggested he knew something significant had happened, even if he couldn't understand what. "The unsupervised visits?" Mara said quietly. "I think we should move forward with them, not because of what happened today, but because you proved you can be the father Enzo needs even in crisis." Adriano looked at her, shocked. "After everything that just happened, you want to give me more access?" "I want to give our son the father he deserves. And you proved today that you can be that person." She touched Enzo's tiny hand. "The supervised visits were never about whether you could care for him physically. They were about whether I could trust you to put his needs ahead of your instincts. Today you did that. You chose legal justice over revenge. You called police instead of handling it the old way. You protected me without controlling me. I was terrified the entire time. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. The old you never feared anything because you thought you could control everything. She met his eyes. But this you understands that some things can't be controlled, only protected. And there's a difference. They sat together until Enzo fell asleep. Then Mara showed Adriano how to lay him in the bassinet without waking him, how to adjust the blanket just right, all the small rituals of putting a baby to sleep that fathers usually learned gradually instead of in supervised sessions. "You should go home," Mara said when they returned to the living room. "Get some rest. We both need it. Will you be okay alone?" "I'm never truly alone anymore. I have Enzo. And I have the protection you arranged, which I'm significantly more grateful for today than I was when Diane first told me about it." She paused at the door. "Thank you. For coming for me. For choosing the right way. For being who our son needs you to be. I'll always come for you." The words came out before he could stop them. "Not because I own you or control you, but because you matter. Because Enzo needs his mother. Because despite everything I destroyed, you're still important to me." Mara's expression softened. "I know. And someday, maybe that won't terrify me." Over the following weeks, the legal machinery ground forward with relentless efficiency. Dmitry Petrov and his organization faced federal charges: kidnapping, assault, racketeering, money laundering. Adriano's testimony, combined with evidence seized in raids, built an ironclad case that would put them away for decades. The media coverage was intense but managed. Adriano's attorneys crafted a narrative of a man leaving criminal enterprise, a father trying to build a legitimate life, collateral damage to that transition. Not perfect, but better than the alternative. And through it all, Adriano showed up. To therapy sessions with Dr. Winters, where they processed the trauma of almost losing Mara and the old patterns that had emerged under pressure. To parenting classes, even though he no longer legally required them. To every unsupervised visit with Enzo, learning to navigate fatherhood without supervision, proving he could handle feeding and changing and soothing without backup. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in June. Mara and Adriano stood before a different judge in a different courtroom, signing papers that officially ended their marriage while establishing co-parenting arrangements that gave them shared custody, flexible visitation, and mutual respect. "I'm sorry," Adriano said as they left the courthouse. "I'm sorry I wasn't the husband you deserved." "I'm sorry too," Mara replied. "Sorry it took running away to make us both understand what we needed." "Do you regret marrying me, knowing how it ended?" She considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain. I regret the fear. I regret that Enzo will grow up with divorced parents instead of a unified family." She looked at him directly. "But I don't regret that he exists. And he wouldn't exist without us, without our marriage, without everything that went wrong before it got better." 3 months later, Mara's nonprofit opened its doors. A small office in a diverse Brooklyn neighborhood, staffed by women who understood exactly what it meant to escape impossible situations. Adriano had connected her with legitimate funding sources, foundations, grants, philanthropists with no ties to his criminal past. But the organization was entirely hers, her vision, her leadership, her way of transforming trauma into purpose. He attended the opening, standing in the back of the room, while Mara gave a speech about survival and agency and building futures beyond violence. Enzo was 6 months old now, sitting on his father's lap, reaching for everything with grabby hands and laughing at sounds only he found amusing. "Your mother is incredible," Adriano whispered to his son. "I hope you understand that when you're older. I hope you learn from her strength instead of my mistakes." After the event, families gathered for informal celebration. Adriano found himself talking to other fathers, sharing stories about sleepless nights and diaper disasters and the overwhelming terror of being responsible for a tiny human. Normal conversation, normal problems, normal life. Mara appeared at his elbow. "You look comfortable." "I feel comfortable. Is that weird?" "It's growth." She reached for Enzo, who went to her with reaching arms and delighted sounds. "I have something to tell you." Adriano's heart jumped. "What?" "I'm seeing someone. A man I met through the nonprofit network. He's kind, stable, completely uninvolved in anything criminal. She said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. I wanted you to hear it from me before Enzo mentions him, though he's too young to really understand yet. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But Adriano forced himself to breathe through it, to recognize that pain without letting it become controlling. Are you happy? I'm hopeful, which is more than I've been in a long time. Then I'm happy for you. And he meant it, even through the ache. You deserve someone who gets it right the first time instead of learning through catastrophic failure. You're getting it right now, with Enzo. That matters. It's not enough to make up for what I did to you. No, she agreed. But it's enough to build a future on, not together romantically, but as partners in raising him. She paused. Can you handle that? Me with someone else? You rebuilding alone? Adriano looked at Enzo, who was playing with his mother's necklace and babbling in that language only babies spoke. I can handle anything if it means being part of his life. And if you're happy, that makes his life better. So yes, I can handle it. That evening, Adriano returned to his penthouse, significantly downsized from the fortress he'd occupied during his marriage, now just a comfortable apartment suitable for a single father with weekend custody. He'd sold most of the ostentatious furniture, the expensive art, the trappings of empire. What remained was simple, functional, and covered in baby gear. He checked his phone. Messages from Victor about the final stages of business transition. The last criminal enterprises were being divested, legitimate operations were thriving under professional management, and the Vescari name was slowly being rebuilt as something other than a threat. A text from Dr. Winters. Proud of how you handled the news about Mara. That's real growth. Another from Diane Foster. Custody evaluation next month. Keep doing what you're doing. And finally, one from a number he almost didn't recognize, his mother. He'd unblocked her weeks ago, though they still hadn't spoken. The message was simple. I saw the news about Mara's nonprofit, about your testimony that put Petrov away, about the man you're becoming. I'm proud of you. When you're ready, I'd like to meet my grandson. Adriano stared at the message for a long time. His first instinct was to refuse, to maintain the boundary, to protect Enzo from the toxic patterns he'd inherited from her. But then he thought about what Dr. Winters had said about generational trauma only breaking when someone chose to break it, about the difference between protection and isolation, about giving people the chance to change, the same way Mara had given him that chance. He typed back, working on becoming someone worthy of introducing to him. When I get there, we'll talk. But it requires you doing your own work, not just waiting for access. Her response came quickly. I started therapy last month. It's harder than I expected. Everything worthwhile is. Keep going. He set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out over the city he'd once tried to control, now just a place where he lived like anyone else. Smaller, quieter, but infinitely more real. Somewhere across Brooklyn, Mara was putting Enzo to bed in the home she'd built without him. Somewhere in the federal system, men who'd threatened them were facing justice. Somewhere in therapy offices and legal aid clinics and courtrooms, the machinery of change was grinding forward. And Adriano Vescari, former crime boss, failed husband, learning father, was finally understanding what his grandfather never taught him. That power wasn't about control. It was about choosing when to let go. That strength wasn't domination. It was showing up consistently, especially when it was hard. That love wasn't ownership. It was respect, boundaries, giving people the freedom to choose you instead of trapping them into staying. He'd lost his wife, lost his empire, lost the life he'd built on fear and control. But he'd gained something infinitely more valuable. He'd gained a son who would grow up knowing his father chose to change. A son who would learn that mistakes didn't define you, how you responded to them did. A son who would understand that true strength was admitting weakness, that real power was serving others, that genuine love required the courage to let people be free. And someday, years from now, when Enzo was old enough to understand, Adriano would tell him the whole story. Not a sanitized version, but the truth. About the man he'd been, the woman he'd driven away, the moment in a federal courtroom when everything changed. He would tell him about the long road back from destruction, About supervised visits and therapy, and learning that control was just fear and expensive clothing. About the day his mother was kidnapped and his father chose law over revenge, proving that change was possible even in the darkest moments. And he would tell him about the choice Enzo would someday face. The choice every person faced when they looked at their history and decided who they wanted to become. Repeat the patterns or break them. Control or trust. Possess or love. Adriano had made his choice, and every day, in every moment with his son, he was proving it was the right one. The city lights glittered against the darkness, full of possibility and threat in equal measure. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Adriano wasn't trying to control any of it. He was just trying to be present, to show up, to earn his place in his son's life one day at a time. It was enough. It had to be enough. And miraculously, impossibly, it was. The end.